Hi guys, so we are back again with the Emperor card. We've already done the Empress and now we are up to the Emperor. So we have the Spelling Reigning Power. It is Arthur and Guinevere. So like we always do, we start with the guidebook and then I will give you guys a rough history that I have of these two. So this is the traditional card of the Emperor. It is the lovers Arthur and Guinevere, and keywords leadership, responsibility, and authority, as we always see with typically with this card. So the legend of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere appears in various forms in British, Breton, Celtic, and Roman history and folklore. I have done a little bit of research that I could, and this is all very true. It is actually very difficult to really pin down consistent, just like with Cleopatra and Caesar. Apparently this was written in sometime around like the early hundreds CE. So getting a clear picture is a little bit difficult. A couple of them really did say it was very much a, she was like the first damsel in distress because she was always being rescued, which is very true for what I'm seeing. So there is that. So from the first moment he saw her willowy form, Arthur loved Guinevere, the daughter of King Leodegrace of the North. But Guinevere loved Lancelot, the king's most loyal knight. Though Merlin warned Arthur that another woman would bring him greater happiness, the king's heart was irrevocably set. Arthur used his power to marry Guinevere, just as he had used his power to rule wisely. After reading the story of Vivienne, and Merlin, I can sort of understand why he was so reluctant to see anything happen to Arthur. And unfortunately, from the different accounts that I've seen, he does actually end up dying through all of the underhandedness that goes on. I don't think she is completely innocent, but I also don't think she did any of this with the intent that he would die. So I'm gonna bring up a couple different histories only because there's a lot of different, like I said, there's a lot of different ways that you could view this, but the gist of it is still more or less the same. We do know that in most histories, at least what I've been able to locate, is that Guinevere was abducted by Mordred, who is Arthur's nephew. Some versions even claim it was his son. So it also claims it was, and I have no doubt it was more or less the truth because this action was closely bound up with the death of Arthur at the end of all of this and the end of the Round Table. The easiest explanation that I could find on the history and understanding of Arthur and Guinevere's whole thing, like I said, it's a pretty concise, it's pretty short, but it's like the most understandable one if you don't really get into trying to read all of the manuscripts that are just kind of scattered. Arthur's nephew, we're gonna stick with nephew. That seems to be like the likeliest position that Mordred was in, was as his nephew, not his son. So Mordred had been planning to usurp the throne. So I don't know how it worked as far as like, okay, he did end up with the throne. So I know that according to this, and from what I found, that Arthur is eventually going to end up dead. And Guinevere is part of this. But what I don't understand is where Vivienne falls in, because she is still kind of more or less part of this plot. She is still sent there. She speaks to Guinevere. So, according to what I'm finding, Guinevere is eventually going to end up in a nunnery. So, I have to wonder if, in the midst of all of what's going on with Arthur and Guinevere, if Vivian has already been sent in as just like an extra to sidetrack Merlin, so that Mordred can get what he wants, which is ultimately the throne. I have to assume that seems the likeliest from what little bit of information I've been able to find. So it does say he is assisted by Vivian. So I know that they were trying to take advantage of whatever opportunity they could. So the king eventually I understand that he has to go to war. Like, there's always war. So he leaves to go to war. And Mordred is put in place as the placeholder. I know there's a word for it. Like, he is the stand-in king while Arthur's away. So I have to assume that he wasn't assumed evil at this point. So whatever he was doing was very much behind the scenes. He wasn't a very obvious villain at this point. So apparently Lancelot and the Queen were busy, and Mordred was able to trap Lancelot and Guinevere in her chambers. So a couple of Mordred's followers were killed, and Lancelot flees to France, where he thinks he will be safe. So Guinevere also flees, but she goes to an abbey in Almesbury. She's given sanctuary, but they don't know who they're actually protecting. She doesn't tell them who she is. She just asks for sanctuary and she gets it. So she lives there for weeks. There is supposedly one maid one novice, my guess is a young nun that hasn't quite reached her full, they just call her a novice. So she is taking on the role as Guinevere's maid. So eventually they receive news that Arthur believed Lancelot to be the traitor and has come back and is continuing to wage war, but now he's doing it on France. So regent. So Mordred is still regent at this point. So Mordred had forced, now in other stories I'm seeing Mordred had forced Guinevere to be his queen while Arthur's away. And I don't know, like, my guess is she was an unwitting victim, but either way, she was still having a relationship with Lancelot. I'm not surprised that she eventually escaped, and I have to assume that, yes, he kind of was keeping her as like a victim, but probably only after she was possibly caught with Lancelot, and then he's just like, I'm gonna hold this over your head. You have to be my queen and help me rule until Arthur comes back. And he assumes that Lancelot probably was the reason for all of this. Like I said, it's very, very choppy. It's just kind of like Cleopatra and Caesar's story, but not as confusing. At least theirs makes logical sense in like the order of history. This is very much a he said, she said kind of history. But either way, Mordred ends up on the throne. So while Guinevere is hiding out, she learns about what's going on, and eventually the king finds her. So eventually the king comes to the abbey and he talks to Guinevere. he has learned what she's done about her infidelity and everything else. He has foreseen his own impending defeat and death. Now that could be just because he's smart enough to realize this is going to happen, or Merlin specifically told him that he will be defeated and eventually die. My guess is just more he's lived long enough to understand that he can't win this time. So he tells her, and there's a little bit of a part where it's actually like a quote. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. I did not come to curse thee, Guinevere. Lo, I forgive thee. Do thou for thine own soul the rest. Let no man dream but that I love thee still. Hereafter, in that world where all are pure, we two may meet before high God, and thou wilt spring to me, and claim me thine, and know I am thine husband. Leave me that, I charge thee, my last hope. Now must I hence, to lead mine hosts, far down to that great battle in the west, where I must strike against the man they call my sister's son. So, nephew, makes sense. Who leagues with heathen and knights, traitors, and strike them dead, and meet myself death, or I know not what my mysterious doom. And thou remaining here wilt learn the event. But hither shall I never come again, never lie by thy side, see thee no more. Farewell. So he definitely knows he definitely knows he's going to die. There's no saving him at this point. So she remains at the Abbey after all this goes down. She doesn't leave. I haven't found a lot of history, like after his death. I didn't really find much there. I do know that she remains at the Abbey and she works against the things that she's done, her immorality, all the consequences of what she's done up until now. She stays and tries to work against those. And she is made abbess. I hope I pronounced that right. She dies there, beloved by all the nuns and all the inhabitants of the surrounding country. So it's a pretty bloody history, at least for Arthur. He really doesn't have a good ending. I think he definitely should have taken into account what Merlin was saying. He definitely should have realized that things like that aren't said lightly. And that's another, I like the way this emperor is looked upon, because Arthur was very great. He went out, he eventually found the Holy Grail. Lancelot, from one of the other ones I found, Lancelot couldn't actually, if it's said to be correct, Lancelot could not even look upon the Grail because of what he'd been doing, which was cheating with Guinevere on his king, and he was supposedly the most loyal of Arthur's men and was still doing this. So I can understand why he couldn't look upon the Holy Grail at that point. But the fact that this is supposed to be the emperor and he seems to think he knows everything, and that he more or less let love decide what he was going to do, kind of really gives a lot more depth to something that we assume we already know. He assumed that Guinevere was going to be good and just and a great wife and queen because he loved her. But in the end, he still loved her, but he also realized the folly. But like it said, he didn't blame her. I think he blamed himself that he didn't realize how badly this was going to go. So, a very good choice, I think, especially given even just knowing a little bit of the history of Guinevere and Arthur really gives you a little bit better understanding of why each of these were chosen for the particular major that they were chosen for, if that makes sense. But yes, so that is the Emperor card of Arthur and Guinevere. Next, we have the Hierophant, which is Romeo and Juliet. I know I probably don't need to go over this story, but I'm going to at least go into it a little bit, maybe give you guys a very extreme brief overlook, and just whatever tidbits I have for you for this next card. But thank you guys so much for checking this out. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.